Hey guys, here we are. One more RWI Touchdown Reimagine Wealth Initiative. I'm here with Stephen and Billy. We were just talking before recording of the new things that we want to do this new year. And one of the things is a type of profiling dynamics where we as hosts and co-hosts, we let's put it this way, we open ourselves to do some empathic listening and to get to know people, get to know their backgrounds, their livelihoods, the way that they came, their lives came to fruition, and of course, and at the end, uh, what they think about an initiative such as this one, reimagining wealth, right, in this third decade of the 20th century. So beginning with me. I'm coming well. It's very hot here in Rio de Janeiro, South America. It's extremely hot. I know that it's not the case for you guys, but here it is extremely hot. But I'm well. I'm doing well, and I'm very excited to have this experience with Billy today. So that's for me. And I pass to you, Stephen. How are you coming, man? Do your check-in.
Yeah, I'm here in Toronto. I'm working through a lot of things at the moment, so I'm interested in um, the this bringing together of some different scales of working, right? So you mentioned there about health and wealth. So I suppose health is what we've got now that we can leverage, and that can be different kinds of health in terms of ability to function, and then wealth is supposedly is a sort of a stored up kind of potential that in some codified way, I don't know whatever that is, but I suppose it's the that could be unlocked in the future. But so how but it's at the end of the day, they bring value to how we can interact in the world and be in the world, and do things in the world, and that can look to different people differently depending if they're doing something individually, personally, part of a team, part of an organization. So these different scales that people are coming in at, um, that finding ways in to what's going to be useful for them and finding ways to connect that is something that I'm really keen to make to have a tractable way, a way that's feasible to do that. So let's see how that can progress. And me and Billy did a bit of work last week with some of the materials here, the cameras and that. That was really helpful. So trying to align, well, what might be of value, what might not be of value based on this type of person coming in. Billy was talking about power dynamics and different types of things to consider. If someone's lower than you, higher than you, but it's all contextual at the same time, right? Because obviously it depends who you interview and what you're trying to do and the nature of the content and dot, dot, dot. So I'm going to pass it over to Billy now.
Hey, how's it going? Well, I've spent the last week just trying to wrap my head around CAD software. Yeah, been doing mostly that. Had how to put it? Yeah, had all kinds of other crap running in the background, but that was just mostly contextual background noise. Yeah. I've just spent at least for most of the last week. I've just spent trying to wrap my head around how CAD software operates and how to use it effectively. Don't know if you've heard about this. Have you heard of a software piece of software called FreeCAD? Yes, no. FreeCAD.
Free cat, no.
Oh, It was about 2 months back. So early November, they did their final 1.0 release, as in here's our new software, ready to roll. It's taken them about 20 years to work on and actually to get the full release. And basically, it does a full replication of everything that Fusion 360, Maya, and a whole range of other commercial software can do, but it's free. Libre and gratis. So
it's free CAD, free CAD, right?
FREECAD.
Yes. Okay.
Free CAD. Worth looking at. It's like Blender when it was first released. It was it's aimed at it's not necessarily aimed at the casual user. It's aimed at the professional user. So the workflow that's required is aimed at replicating the workflow required by professionals. There's one aspect that's set up purely for BIM systems, building information modeling. Don't know if you've come across them. BIM systems within architecture.
Not something I know. That's not an area I know too much about.
Okay. The idea is you can. The buzzword that was, if you want to look up the buzzword, it was known as digital twins in architecture. The idea is that you've got a digital model of a complete building. And the idea is that you can, from that digital model, you can then extrapolate out all of the construction drawings that are required for actually putting a physical building together. But also, the way that it's set up, you can link from that digital model. You can link into all of the computer systems that are being used for controlling that building. So you've not. So it's not while rather than it being a static model that you would get in traditional architecture, where you would look at the model and then use the model to create the building. And this is a living dynamic model, so you can use it. To operate the building as well. Now, from
so you
one
can
aspect,
operate the building. Is that what you said? You can operate the building.
Yes, operate the buildings. So all of the automation systems that you've got installed within the building, you can operate them via that model as well, or a version of the model. And again, you'll get the usual permissioning systems, as in who's allowed to turn on and off the central heating, that sort of aspect. But that sort of whole thing, it's and that's just one. Okay, that particular system, that's just one workbench that's within FreeCAD. They use a variety of other workbenches, both for woodworking, for metalworking, for designing for metal casting, for designing for CNC work, designing for architecture, designing for welding, designing for.
Yes, it's in this sense, it's what we call it. We call it in complexity. We call it a meta tool. It's
yes.
a meta tool.
Oh, yes. Well, it's
yes.
That's
in complexity. Yes, because I didn't dive in complexity.
Okay.
It's a meta tool. It can fit anything. You can look at it.
Right.
And you model it. You have the meta tools to model whatever you want to model in the real world, right? And this is great. This is really great.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's also because of the how to describe it. Because it's not just that you're modeling something within the real world. It's that you are modeling something. You can use them for creating models that you can then feed into feed into a 3D printer or feed into a model, feed into a sheet wood printer, whatever. And the idea is with that you can then take those models and then create them in the real world. So you're creating not just physical.
Could we say that it's a type of meta tool for open hardware?
Oh, fuck yes, entirely. That's entirely what it's for.
Could I ask
yes,
a little question on that? Because I think that's interesting.
Yes.
Because Blender has managed to be one of the ones which has kind of worked as a relatively become a professional tool. I always wonder because I often have had sort of this sort of open source stuff, and it ends up traditionally it always ended up being often it was like like open office and stuff. It was just always a step behind, or they were kind of maybe we're in a different domain now because things like the operating systems have become more homogenized. Windows and Mac are not so different. And is the driver now not the making of the software, because maybe the way to make the software is becoming more ubiquitous, and it almost needed a special company, and they had to get paid, right? Because someone has to get paid to make the stuff. But there's now the actual producing of the products or the using of it and that side of action is able to support this, because the most important thing is the ability to integrate now so that you can do more integrated stuff. Is that what drives this now, to be able to, how does that business model even work for people, right? Because someone somewhere has to be able to put that time into it and it's still feasible. So is it because the software development scene has now got more, it's not such a big, hurdle to even attempt to get into, and the knowledge is more consolidated that it's become possible? What do you think?
No, it's where to begin?
Can I help?
Please do.
You see, Stephen, we're in the transition space with generative AI and machine learning and things like that, of just doing data computation to intelligence computation. It's a different thing. So because you see, the language that we're speaking here, English, is a code, right? So you have code. So the typical language that you use for software, it's code too, but you have different languages, different code languages for different things, right? And in this sense, the FreeCAD as a meta tool, it's a meta tool that has the capability to interact and to have a conversation with different ways to code, let's say, to design and code whatever you want to design and code when it comes to the open hardware space, right? So in this sense, it's not what you're asking is not out there yet. Like it's going to be out there, in a sense that we're still getting there, right? We're not there yet. We're getting there.
Although there is something out there. I mean, we say in the context of this.
But I just want to make a distinction.
Okay.
FreeCAD doesn't have anything attached to generative AI or machine learning, nothing like that. It maybe will have. We don't know. But originally, it is just like a meta space where makers, right, coming from maker spaces, coming from Fab Labs makers, or makers that are in its own home, they can have a tool to design, to code and design whatever they want to materialize, right? In terms of hardware. But it doesn't mean that this process, this dynamics, can benefit from this uh, type of new computing that is emerging with AI, right? Generative AI, machine learning, and things like that. So I don't know if I really answered you, but I'm trying to contribute for you to understand the differences in the timing that we're living in.
Okay. How to put it? Where to start? If you look in the chat, in the link that I just stuck in the chat.
Yeah, I saw that.
Resiliencemaps.org. Basically, this is a model. Right. This is a model that shows the 6 most common forms of death, apart from old age. And it shows the levels of infrastructure that's required to solve those 6 problems from the point of view of dealing with a single person, dealing with a family or a home, a small home, dealing with a village, dealing with a town, a city, a region, and or a whole country, and a whole planet. The idea is that with what was it? Each of most of these things are already solved problems. However, the solutions that are required, each of them will have a specific energy cost. What's it? If someone's too hot, hey, provide a fan. If a single person is too hot, provide a fan for them. If a group of people are too hot, provide an air conditioning system. Provide moisture and heat capture, moisture capture systems. Now, the reason that each of the different solutions will have a minimum energy cost overall, and what was it? And a minimum energy cost per person, which means that some of the individual solutions, when you take them, the solutions that will work for an individual, if you scale them up to 10,000 people, they won't necessarily be as cost effective as some of the larger solutions. And some of the larger solutions will have a minimum number of people required before they become cost effective. Now, what was it? Okay. Now, if you look at the what was it? If you look at the range of stuff that's been going on, from my perspective, and I'm speaking with the perspective of someone who's like who's an engineer. Anytime I come across a problem, my first approach is thinking, okay, how can I build a solution that will solve this particular problem? What can I do to make a tool that will fix this? And the more that I look at these problems and the basic ideas that are there, the basic ranges of infrastructure that's required to solve these problems, we have had the technological capabilities as a species, we have had the technological capabilities to create all of this stuff for everyone on the planet since the 1850s. What's it? Yes, our population levels have increased, but so too have our technological capabilities. Now, this thing, because because of the way that our current societies are currently set up to operate, there's always going to be some form of inequality. But with use of digital tooling, like FreeCAD is one example, but the use of digital tooling, digital fabrication, the price point of making these solutions has fallen through the floor, which means that we're now capable of building this sort of stuff for everyone. Now, this is one of the reasons why I got into looking at digital fabrication. Decades ago, back in the early 90s, I met one guy who was working as a sort of fully qualified engineer, and I was fresh new engineer, just wandering around, just seeing what was going on. And one of the things that he was told by one mentor was that take a look at what was it? Always be looking for the next big thing. And he's like, what? He said, look, it doesn't matter what you're doing, and if you're working in technology, the cutting edge will always be moving further on, which means there's a reasonably good chance that at some point the skill sets that you've got will become obsolete. And every technology has a lifespan within the commercial marketplace. That doesn't mean that the utility of a technology has stopped. It doesn't mean that the technology has stopped being capable of doing things, of operating and doing the tasks that it was originally created for. It's just a case of how well it can sell. So the point is that I saw this within the recording industry. Previously, if you wanted to be able to produce broadcast quality audio and video, it required tools that were in the region of cameras that worth that cost 10 grand, microphones that would cost 5 grand. These days, hey man, you can get them in a mobile phone. Now it's that sort of range of the increase in the range of capabilities of what you can do, and how this type of technology, it might start off as the cutting edge and eventually ends up being the sort of stuff that peasants use as normal tools. That's the sort of how to put it. That's the sort of taking the main. Sorry, it's still aphasic. Yeah, sorry, I should have said at the start. I have extremely intense ADHD, and I'm still having problems with speaking as a side effect of the brain surgery I had back in 2013. So, yeah, nearly 12 years back. It's recovering sort of reasonably, but I'm still not quite there yet. But so my apologies for some of the ways that I'm communicating. However, the overall baseline for when you look at a lot of the infrastructures that's described in resilience maps, they're the low-hanging fruit. They are already solved problems. And this is stuff that could be used for everyone globally. It just hasn't been implemented. Why? Hey, that's a good question. That's the partial range of inequalities and the partial, what was it? The economics of scarcity, which is which is daft. Literally, it's daft. It's an insane way to behave because we already have the technologies of abundance. All of the problems that are described there are existing solutions that can be easily made. They can be easily powered. What they aren't being They aren't being built by governments. They aren't being built and maintained by other by large corporations. Yet, the simplest thing to do is empower people to build the tooling for themselves, and this is part of what I was working part of what I'm working on. Sorry,
Can I just ask a question on this?
No.
Because I think
Fantastic.
Thanks,
okay,
Billy.
sorry. I went off on several different tangents, and there was a
you know
couple
what?
of stories
You're actually doing really well today. You're taking your time and you're pacing yourself really well. So it's working well.
Hey,
so you know,
first
sometimes
coffee of the day.
just one thing one thing that you brought up, and you mentioned this resilience maps before. So one thing we've been exploring is when people come in and they bring their tools or instruments, right? And how people can align with them, right? So this is quite a useful tool, and we can even jam with how this works. So, for instance, that gives you a chance to maybe explain a worldview. Like you brought that up, it maybe gave a chance to explain a worldview of individuals and different ways we could understand epistemology almost of the meaning of the issues of being alive and the resources we have to bring to bear. So that's quite a useful tool. And we were looking at some others, so for instance, in relation to that, because you've got in there those different scales, right? And I think one of the things that comes in as well is, yes, these things can be given now. And in a way, you've seen that across the world. More and more things can be given to the individual. So before you had to go to the cinema, then you could have a television, but you still went to the cinema. And now you can have every single child can have a cinema on their phone theoretically, right? So
Yes.
that's a mixed bag, right? In the sense of, so there's a scale question, like you said, of as well as in resources, what can be, how do these things get optimized? Because like you said, this CAD thing, it might well be that you have someone who's a professional and they help to do this integration, which may help people, customers, or other people, maybe 1,000 of them who are clients or someone who's not as technical, like in that ecosystem, right? And someone else might be more of a marketing person, someone might be more of a content provider or an editor or a writer or an academic or a community member. So would you say that you've ever aligned yourself with any other people? Do you have other people that work with that tool, or what's your thoughts about that scale question and how it, that tool and some other tools come together for that?
Okay. Okay, one of the larger questions. Right, hang on. Let me just open the chat and refer some hang on. Okay.
I just want to point out, Bidi, before you start to respond to Stephen's question, that I really love the way that you Chim you connect things, right? Um, when how you connect the resilience with the free cat. I really like the way that you your starting point to say, hey, these technologies here for an individual, they are out there, they're simple, they can implement because they were able to scale, right? And so it's a knowledge base that it's out there, right? And then you came back to the free cat, and it was very interesting the way that you correlate these two dynamics, really. But I just want to point out before you respond to Stephen's questions that it's really interesting. I just want to point out one thing that maybe Stephen is not aware of it, and maybe you are. Is that, Stephen, when it comes to scaling in the commons movement, in the peer-to-peer movement, it doesn't. We don't think in an industrial way, in a market industrial way. Like it scales, it becomes accessible to people to buy it. The knowledge base, people start to create knowledge base around it. In the commons is more like a peer-to-peer expansion thing, like do commons peer production. So you generate knowledge and all sorts of knowledge around whatever it is, and this knowledge is accessible for anyone. Like in the case of Sensorica, everything that Sensorica does, the knowledge is there, the information, the database, everything, the experience of people is out there. And so the scaling up is more like a peer-to-peer expansion dynamics and not a market-driven one. Like, when he said that back in the days, if you want to have a very quality video, you need a lot of money to buy, a good camera, a good phones, and something like that. And now you have all of that in the smartphone. But that happened basically majorly because of this type of political economy that we're embedded in, this hyper-consumerist, market-driven, scaling up to infinite things that once that millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions buys it, the cost of it lowers, goes down, and it becomes more accessible for people, and that I know. I'm just saying how hyper consumers works.
Yeah, no, that is true. That is true. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Venetia, but and so within that, you've also got the ecosystem of, like, for instance, say I have the people making medical equipment, and then and that gets used, and there's people who create that, and they could have a peer network, and then that gets used by nurses, and those nurses could have a peer network, right? And that could also have doctors, and they could have a peer network. But each of those three peer networks could be completely different, right? The people creating the equipment may have no idea of nursing protocols for patient-based care, how to talk to a patient, right? The nurse might not know anything about code, and the doctor might not know that. They may know more about diagnosis, but each of them could have their own. So you've got this interesting thing with the peer-to-peer disciplinary kind of cluster. Like I noticed in the applied psychology department, I don't know if they still use it, but at Solomon's they were doing this idea of a learning cluster. So you have different learning clusters. So, like I'm saying, I think you're right, but there is this kind of individualization, which has partly come by basically taking the stuff developed in the professional world and then distributing it. Like, for instance, effectively Twitter is a Reuters news feed from 30 years ago, that we can all access. The only trouble is you're actually accessing something which is a broadcast medium. And people don't necessarily realize that there's reasons why we have to be careful with that, because you're not just, it's like putting notices out on the subway, right? You know, there's ethical questions when you're doing that. So the way that, so even if you have a peer-to-peer network of how do I create a distributed messaging system, when the messaging system's rolled out into the world, the people using it are there's an ecosystem of scale as well. And that's why I was thinking that, because so we got two things going on, because when mobile phones come out with phones, this is now being distributed into consumer society, right? But not necessarily that everyone's a peer to peer. Like, so peer to peer means we're somehow related in our practice, right? We're somehow related in our way of knowing about the world, right? So just like Sensorica is got people gravitate who've got some technical background, maker spaces, these kinds of things, right? And there can be different clusters of knowing, right? But sometimes we're going to have to sort of integrate with other people, right? So we're trying to find that speciality, like you're saying. RWI is trying to have that idea of wealth, health, and things that can be around that. You know, I'm trying to do maybe more of the multi-scale, but what I realize is I have whatever practice I have, and the peers that might learn the practices I have, I can't share that with the people who interact with my program, because they just need to know what they need to know to engage. Do you see what I mean? They need to know what's the experience of that they're going to go on, even if they're trying to generate information and knowledge. So that also comes up when we're talking about onboarding someone. So for instance, if someone's coming in and you're talking, like you're saying, about a peer-to-peer, well, what is the tractable ways that goes into different scales of knowing, right? This is how I see the world. This is how I see my peer network. This is how I see this project in this peer network. This is how I see this interaction, right? And in the same way with Billy, there's talking about like you talked about those different things, and you've got the individual being serviced. So, okay, that tool becomes useful for the individual being serviced, but as you mentioned, you could presumably in that diagram put the power station in the middle, I would imagine, or something. I don't know. Yeah, go on.
Right. The reason that specific the resilience maps diagram focuses on one has individual individual at the center, it's because it's a triage model. So the question is, can you deal with solutions that will work for one person, as opposed to solutions that will work for a scale of a family, as opposed to a village or a house, a neighborhood, a region, a whole village, that sort of approach. So it's a question of what's the least cost, and what's the least number of people impacted, and for the up to the maximum number of people impacted. So it's the question of finding solutions, finding the scaling solutions. But that's
Can I ask just one question on that? Where would you be positioned when you're looking at that viewpoint? So if you think about looking for those solutions, whereabout are you looking as a policymaker? Because you wouldn't be the individual looking out in the world that way. You'd be looking as a particular person.
Right. Bit of backstory that has to crop up which isn't explained in any of the official write-ups, but it's stuff that's what's the phrase? It's the lore, attached lore. The idea with this was designed by one colleague who was working on one of the earthquakes in Haiti. After working on one of the earthquakes in Haiti around the early 2000s, just after the turn of the millennium. One of the things he was down there trying to organize some of the disaster relief. and trying to plan, and trying to create systems for dealing with disaster relief to help with people. And the problem was that he found that all of the different agencies each were operating on their own tangent. The Red Cross was doing one thing. The UN aid agencies were each doing something slightly different from each other. And so what he did, he created this basic map saying, look, these are the problems we need to solve. You have to combine that map with total transparency of action from all the people that are the actors that are involved, whether it's organizations, bureaucracies, or and individuals. So the idea, and as basically, whenever because you've got a simple, clearly defined set of questions, and then you've clearly defined these are the problems that we need to solve. How many people do we have to deal with? X amount. Okay, what's the level of solution that will work for X amount of people? That's the stuff that we need to work on. Which are the problems that are directly impacting on people in the next 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months? So if it's the reason that I use 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months is because 3 days without water and you'll die, 3 weeks without food and you'll die, 3 months without proper shelter and you'll die. And it's at which point it's like, okay, the water one you need to think in terms of instantly dealing with the 3 days, 3-day time scale for solving problems. The food one, you'll need to hunger. You'll need to deal with think of solutions that you can set up and get running within the 3-week time scale. Now
okay, that's useful. Can I just say one thing with that, Billy, as well? Is just what Vinny was saying.
I haven't finished the description.
Oh,
I haven't finished what description. One of the reasons that he had to ask for total transparency was because of some of the problems that were cropping up when working with the USA branch of the Red Cross. They raised about $20 million within the USA to help with that particular earthquake. I think that was rough figures. Only about 80% of that cash didn't go to Haiti. It was used to pay off debts that the American branch had run up. They weren't used for anything. This was where the money wasn't ring fenced. It was it just went into the general funding pot that they used, and the funding pot was basically being used to pay off all of the debts that they'd incurred just through the previous mistakes. That was a problem. Secondly, when they came into Haiti, the Red Cross were tasked with building housing. But what did they do? But they built 3 houses. Total 3. And that was like, what? You had all of this extra. You had all of this money. What happened to it? That's one of the reasons why you say total transparency of action, so that it can reduce the amount of routes for corruption, routes for nepotism, and routes for waste. So it means that all of the energy that's coming into that situation is being used effectively and used usefully, and it isn't being used to, I don't know, buy the CEO of a second swimming pool, for example.
Now, can I just say one thing? There's a good point you make. Just one thing on that, because it comes back to what Vinny was saying there about complexity. Is essentially you also see that. Because obviously in the 2000s, the complexity stuff hadn't really kicked in fully, right? Is you do also hit a point where things start changing and it's never really tractable. Like the solution can never be fully solved. Like complexity sort of comes in and there's always this kind of, I mean, in some cases it's just a broken system. So there's but like you say, there's also this challenge of tracking. So this is where the distributed nature and also the ability to find complexity and granularity, you know what I mean? And say, okay, so because Yeah, so I think there's an interesting mix there between what can be done to make transparency from above, but also one of the things I think is from above to say some things I just cannot fully know without people more distributed being able to help. And that's not because I'm not good enough. It's just not tractable. And that's the complexity question. So anyway,
Every model is incomplete.
yeah,
And that's the thing. Every model, if you want to have a completely accurate model of reality, it's going to be so large and so unwieldy that it's going to be absolutely unusable.
exactly.
A completely accurate map would be one-to-one, a whole scale model of the universe that that we are
Exactly.
it would be so large that it would be impossible to use.
Exactly.
And it's every model that you create will have to cut out some aspect, will focus on some aspects of reality and miss out others.
Exactly.
That's inherent in the way that we model things.
Exactly. So that's a
Because
limit to
otherwise,
modeling, but that is a limit to modeling per se. So this is where, like in our body, we have no model, but our cells find a way to know how to relate. So this is where also from a distributed point of view, the distributed, if there is going to be also a distributed component to help in, participatory approaches, like you say, Web3, there needs to be some form of agency in those areas that helps the person who can only ever have a limited model. Does that make sense? So then, because and that's where active inference is basically they call it it's an approximate Bayesian inference. The question is, how does the approximation move forward when you've got multiple agents having agency who haven't got a map of any sort, but
that's the
that's the
thing is,
question.
that's the reason that he brought that particular resilience maps design. That's what he brought to one thing where he's saying, these are the problem. Where he brought to one meeting saying, these are the problems we need to solve. These are the direct problems that are going to cause people to die. We need to fix these. And they were great about thinking, yeah, that's a great idea for approaching the problems. So the bureaucracies did not like the idea of transparency. If you look at right the what's his name, because I've been based in London for so long, and the people that I've been meeting at the meetups in London, the sort of tech meetups in London, a large chunk of them were people who were working in and around the city. I tended to think in terms of how to put it, not just the startup circuit, but the think in terms of finance and think in terms of energy. Think in terms of energy flow. But what's it? Right. If you look at the links that I've stuck in the chat, there's a range of different links that are there. The London, what was it? The first one is the Web Archive, Amersfoort, Fab Lab Amersfoort. That's one that I've been pointing that as an example regularly as a way for the last heading for the last 15, 20 years. One of the original MIT Fab Lab, it cost between 150 and 250 grand to build. And this was in 2000, academic year 2000/2001. 9 years later, you get four artists from Amersfoort in Holland who built exactly the same thing setup, as in an identical setup that was an identical spec, but it cost them 5 grand. €5,000. That's how much the price point of digital fabrication hardware is. That's it's the Dutch auction of technology. This means that if you're doing sort of larger scale manufacture, if you want to try and increase the scale of the manufacturing, this can now be done by smaller groups of people. Now, if you look at the the Kickstarter project for it, the Kickstarter Maslow. This is a version of a CNC router, which basically can carve an 4x8 sheet of 18mm plywood. Now, the idea with trying to deal with 4x8 sheets, they're the standard ones that are the results of that you can buy buy from the industrial supply chains, and they're manufactured to a relevant set of standards. It means that they're consistent. You can use the same thing and you can get a consistent set of results. This is a way of creating a machine, open source hardware way of creating a machine that you can feed it a graphics file and it will carve it out of a 4x8 sheet of plywood. Now, if you look for ShopBot, you'll see an example of the original types of machines that were out there. Search for it later. It's a rabbit hole that's worth exploring. However, the thing that needs to be remembered is, like 10 years ago, when the original Maslow came out, 10 years ago, ShopBots were yep, there you go. Right. 10 years. Okay, that's the latest iteration of Maslow. I've got a version 2 of the Maslow technology. However, previously, if you were going to carve that, do any form of carving of that sort of scale of material, that required a flatbed machine that would set you back about 50 grand. Along with at least the workshop that I remember, the owner had to spend 20 grand setting up the workspace, and then he was still having a 10 grand a year support contract. If you scroll up to if you look at the Maslow stuff, 500 quid for a kit. It's 1% of the cost. So the simplest way to scale it up is just to buy and build more of them. Now, those are all interesting stories, and I'd recommend having a look at that particular thing. And if you can pause the video there. No, if you pause the video because you're starting to slow down. And if you where's the chat window? The next
you can continue to speak. I'm just showing the material in the Kickstarter.
Right. If you look at WikiHouse, the WikiHouse link, this is the next. Right. After looking at the Fab Lab Instructable, that's the point. And this was at the I came across that at the time when I was building one of the second workshops for the London Hack, building version 2 of the workshop for the London Hackspace. And we came out with a whole range of different tools. And this one, for example, what you've got there, you think, okay, that's cute. What can I use it for? If you look at the WikiHouse link, wikihouse.cc. Hang on, pause. Well, right. If you look, pause the video, and then if you look, open a fresh tab and then look at WikiHouse.
Sorry, you want me to do what?
If you're still People Springs, if you can open a new tab and look at the wikihouse.cc link.
Updates.
It's in the chat.
WikiHouse. Is it wikihouse.cc?
Yes, that's
okay.
it. Yeah.
You want to show another thing? Okay, got you. Okay. I know WikiHouse. I here in Brazil I be part of the project in WikiHouse here in Brazil.
Oh, cool! Excellent. Well, they were an interesting crowd. Oh, hmm.
But WikiHouse came to Brazil in 2011, 2012, if I record well.
Yep, that's about the time that they were operating. Now, the thing is, if you look at the library, if you look at the library, if you drop down the library menu, designs, and the designs link, and you've got these are houses that were created these are houses that were created that are compliant with the UK building codes.
Do you want me to click in any of this design here?
There's no specific design that I want you to look at. There's no specific design. These are all ones that you can make with the CNC machine. The underlying structures, and if you look in the library and for library section and the blocks, you'll then see the.
So it's like a little drill, isn't it? It's like a little router that drills out the shape.
Well, yes. Firstly, it's a little router that you use to carve out a shape out of wood.
Mm-hmm.
And if you scroll down, keep scrolling down. Design kits, walls. Each of those, right? You see, each of those blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Each of those blocks is a single component for making a slice of a house or a slice of a building.
Mm-hmm.
Each of those components can be made from material from parts that are carved out of a 4x8 sheet. Each of the connecting modules that are joining them all together are parts that are being carved out of an 18mm 4x8 sheet. So we've got we already have the technological capabilities to build all of the housing structures that people need.
Right.
No one on our planet should be homeless.
Well, you got to get the wood from somewhere, right?
Sustainably farmed.
Yeah, but you still got to get it.
Yes. Oh, there is what's this? When one guy was when Vinny was talking about this, he was talking about how many weeks worth supply for the USA for Home Depot would it require.
Mm.
For example, for dealing with the housing in Haiti, he would say, okay, that requires this amount of plywood and this amount of sheets. So that's roughly 3 weeks worth of Home Depot supplies. So if you think about the amount of material that's on the supply chain that's going to Home Depot, 3 weeks worth would have replicated all of the stuff from Haiti. And literally, it would have. That's the amount of material that already exists, and that's the amount of material that would have fixed all of the problems in that country.
to get the. Well, it would certainly make a big dent in the situation.
We
That
already
would
have
be.
the abundance already exists.
And can I ask you one question, or something I was gonna ask you as you're doing that is the like if I was to never mind. Do you remember if you remember
What?
before? If you remember before when you showed us something, you see, I was one thing I was going to ask. I was curious that you see behind me on the wall here.
Yep.
I've got this diagram, and this is actually your diagram that you did. And I was wondering in relation to this because it could relate to it was a if I was to go and zoom in on that,
Hang on.
how does that relate to this? This is a model that you use, I believe, thinking about scaling stuff. You know, pure design, pure fabrication, pure engineering,
Hang on.
and the
Sorry.
overlap.
Could you shrink the people's the share screen share, and so I can see the
Oh
so I
yeah,
can actually
okay.
see the
Okay. Yeah, so you see that one. You remember that one?
hang, um hang on view sorry, switch to speaker view. So um bollocks. Hang on. Right.
So this was like a model that you used when you were sharing something with us last year, and Billy, and that was one where you shared the idea that you've got pure design, pure engineering, pure fabrication, and you have this kind of in between. Um,
Yep.
and
Well, BATNA. Yes. Well, that's the thing. The okay, that was the sort of that made sense from the point of view of when I was chatting with Timmy. The point is that the smaller or what's it? It's changing the scale of operations
mhm.
because these digital fabrications are fabrication tools are now way cheaper. It means that smaller organizations can use them.
Yes.
Previously, this type of economies of scale from manufacturing was only available to larger organizations, such as back in 2000, 2001, when it cost 150 to 250 grand to build them.
Yeah.
And then 9-10 years later, it's $5 grand. Today you can get better spec versions, but you can also just build them out of stuff that you can dig out of skips.
Right. Well, the digging out of skips is good because then it's flexible. And I suppose you also get so then the question becomes is how does someone know when to use like so for instance you could have someone who sets more localized someone somewhere might have to gain the skills of how to run makerspaces, do makerspaces, you know what I mean? Because it's like you get beginners mistakes all the time, right? So so some things people can have,
Yep.
some things also this is the thing is knowing which things to choose. So some things it's like I could just go down the
Right.
road, buy it. Like for instance, you're not going to make if you're going to get a screw, it's a standard size screw. You're
Okay.
going to get a standard size screw, right?
It's
So that
right.
takes some skills. How do
No.
we scale
Right.
that?
Simple way. Don't do it on your own.
Yeah.
The reason that if you have what's it? This is something that which is one of the reasons why I argue that this is one of the reasons that the commercial Fab Lab organizations continue to fold.
Mm.
The only there are almost no commercial Fab Labs for profit commercial
Right.
Fab Labs floating around. They've the ones that tried doing that in the UK, they all went bankrupt.
Right.
As soon as their external funding streams died, they stopped operating.
Right.
The reason that happened is because of who they were competing with. Every individual, it's because the price point has fallen to the point of reaching the stage where it's now just the cost of manufacturing. They're competing with their most innovative customers doing things for themselves. It means that unless, if you look at the London Hackspace links that are there, that's a workshop that was created and Makerspace. It's owned and run by ourselves, and we've built it ourselves. Our primary expense is finding the box to put it in, which is why, when you consider London real estate prices, it's a different story altogether.
Yeah.
But the problem is that when you're we have a limited amount of time in order to operate, in order to do things, which means that the way that, if you're focused on learning how to use a 3D printer and learning how to use the optimum way to get a 3D printer to operate and run, that's time you're not spending learning to use a lathe, or learning to use a welder, or learning to use a CNC machine, or learning to use a PCB manufacturing setup. All of those, in order to be able to do something like that, you're going to end up in order to compete commercially within the market space, in terms of, this is the amount of things I can produce to the level of quality, to this level of quality. How do I extrapolate that? How does that compete with what else is out there? Is it going to be cheaper for me to get a job and just buy it in, rather than make it myself? But because you only have a limited amount of time, unless you're starting to work with a larger group of other people, because you've got a limited amount of time, it means that your own personal design space and your own personal way of looking at how these things operate, it gets narrower. You stop seeing the wide range of possibilities because you're focused on just the things that required for one specific tool. And that's the example that you spoke about for this, with the screws. I actually actively saw that in an example. I saw that in the actual workshop, where I had to turn around and say to one guy, "No, stop! You're trying to use a wood drilling bit in a drill, but the stuff that you're trying to drill is steel." And this guy was a computer programmer, and he just thought, "Well, it's a drill. What's the difference?" And he said, "Oh, strings." We said, "What do you mean strings?" And he said, "Oh, it's quite simple. Every a piece of data should be held in string format. It doesn't matter what you need it for. Strings are the best way to do things." And the guy was like, "You can't do that. You wouldn't be able to hold floats. You wouldn't be able to hold. You wouldn't be able to hold all kinds of other data structures. Those are not the appropriate tool to use." And I just said to him, "Okay, so strings aren't right. This is not the appropriate tool used for drilling wood, for drilling metal." And he's just like, "Oh shit." And it was just a case of being able to put that into a context where he could understand that he wasn't using the appropriate tool.
Yeah.
Now, everyone is maybe, no matter how brilliant you are at something, you will be completely stupid. And I mean completely stupid when it comes to working in a field that you know nothing about.
Yeah, no,
The
that
types
makes
of
a lot of
mistakes that
sense.
you'll make will be the novice's mistakes, because because no matter how skilled you are in one field, you're a novice in another. Because you'll be a novice if it's something, you'll make novice mistakes if it's something you haven't tried before. Again, this is why it needs to be working with other people, and you need a small group of other people. which is one of the reasons why I've been looking for a bunch of other folks to work on stuff like this.
Billy, TB just arrived here.
Yo, hey TB, how's it going?
Yeah, we're basically already over the top here. We're almost finishing today's RWI touchdown. And
sorry, because I had to respond to an emergency. I had to fix 2 devices for the hospital there that were some problems with the USB connection this morning. So I was at the lab, but working on these feather things.
Hey.
Okay, my friend. Just 2 questions. First, will you be free this afternoon for us to connect and work on that podcast project? Or
yes, I know. Yeah, that's what I said. Yes, I'll be at the lab. Yes.
Okay, because you're already in the lab, right?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the first question. The second question is, me, Stephen, and Billy, we can put you up for what we're doing here today, the type of touchdown that we're having here, if you want, or we just can't. We just continue to do what we're doing here and finish it. What do you want? I just want to know if you want us to put you a part of what we're doing here today, or we just continue to.
Nice little summary. It would be nice, a little summary, not too long, but just a little summary.
Okay. Yeah. You see, today I suggested something that is I forgot to share in the previous New Year touchdowns, that would be nice for us to start to record, to, let's say, host folks like Billy, not only folks like Billy, but anyone that we invite here, to profile their understanding, their vision, their world vision around the things around their lives and the things that matter for them, and the things that they understand that is related to wealth, right? And in this sense. So we started with Billy today, and we're having a very interesting conversation around accessibility to things in general, not specifically to products. Because when we say products, we already have this notion of markets, right? Yeah. So and we are and Billy start to convey a very interesting way to share his understanding of how things can be done and once there's a lot of knowledge out there, and there's a lot of skilled people out there, but at the same time there's a lot of people that are interested are not aware that we can create stuff that doesn't necessarily have a market tag on it. So, and he was explaining the way that he sees it, and he shared a lot of links with us, and that's basically. I'm just trying to really condense, synthesize what we're doing here. But I will pass to Billy for him to share his understanding of what we're exploring here today together. So Billy, feel free, my friend.
Where to begin? Right. what's his name? These are already most of the things that we're trying to deal with, which require for one of the things I'm looking at is technology for the 99%. How much do you have to earn to be a member of the global 1%? How much do you have to earn per year to be a member of the global 1%? Yes. Back in 2010, 2012, it was 24,000 grand sterling to be a member of the global 1%. In London, that's survival. That's tending towards a lower middle class sort of beginning teacher's salary, and that's you for what's it? That sort of level of being a member of the global 1%. It's got that's changed because it's gone up to about 32 grand. Another Brexit bonus, but that's a measure of how little money that 99% of the people who are the 99% of the other people on the planet are surviving on. Something like between 50 and 70%, we're surviving on $1 a day. This is a way of creating solutions for them, creating infrastructure for them.
Yeah.
That is it. This is, and because it's coming from an engineer solution, this is a way that they could build the stuff for themselves. I mean, you've come across Apropedia, yes? No?
Yes.
Well, I know Tippy has, but it's hang on, let me just drop the there's an example. There's also what's his name? Yeah. There's what's it? I mean, there's to catch the To catch the rain. Those are examples of how a water harvest. To catch the rain.org. They're examples of water harvesting systems and water purification systems that have been built by individuals in small groups, small communities. Those are the solutions that they're using are based on mostly materials that have been come from the industrial supply chains. Yep. They also have to catch the rain, but they also have a matching book called To Catch the Sun, which is about set up for doing solar power harvesting of energy, and they've got another 4 or 5 planned, which are all based around trying to find this sort of solutions that people can manufacture for themselves. Yep.
Yeah.
And you can see these are already solved problems. And you can say, hey, look, as it is, you can see there, this is the type of problem this is the type of formula that they've created. So that you can just say, okay, I'm at this climate, I have this much rainfall, I'm at this latitude. How much water can I harvest per year? How much do I need per year? How much do my family need? So how much will this particular design provide for this particular, provide for this many people. And it's simple to deal with.
Oh, that's cool. They do that a lot in South Africa, actually, with the schools and everything. They have a JoJo tank at the end of the school roof, and they capture the water.
They actually do one of the aspects in that particular there's a couple of sections in that particular book where they talk about two specific buildings in South Africa, one of which was a school where the people built the stuff for themselves. But that's the thing. Okay. Lonnie, really nice geezers, man. The thing about the main difference with these projects is these are ones that most NGOs won't bother to fund. They're too effective.
Well, I don't know about this. I don't know why would they not fund them because they're too effective? I mean, you can get local builders to also build this stuff, right? Because they do have builders that do that. Like we had, so it's not only got to be done through, through this methodology.
Right. If you look at the tangent, but relevant tangent. If you look in the chat for the CD3WD project link, yep, that's the one. This was a guy that I met back in. I was talking to him back in 1999, 2000. He was a lecturer at the University of Harare in Zim. Wasn't exactly popular with the rest of the expat community, and because he'd married a local lassie, he'd married a local woman. So it was one of those bits where he was like, as far as he was concerned, the stuff that he was working on was aimed at helping his wife's family and his wife's family's kin, and all of the rest of the extended family there. However, there's Alex, picture of Alex. However, the Alex got a certain amount of social ostracism because he was seen as not playing the white man's game. And yes, this is indirectly a colonial attitude. And yes, this is how I came to understand what was going on with some of the stuff that's with the NGOs.
That is true, because you got to buy from the white suppliers. Yeah.
Now, the point is, at the same time that the One Laptop per Child project was starting, this guy was trying to start this project, where he had 20 gigs worth of 20 gigs worth of, and 20 CDs worth of CD-ROMs of data that were manuals for farming, for agriculture, for different forms of agriculture, aquaculture, manufacturing, blacksmithing, and a whole range of other what was it, medical care and a whole range of other stuff. These were all things that the UN and aid organizations were producing anyway, but they were only available to the people who were running the projects. No, the people who were running the projects. They weren't available to the locals who were participating, or the people who local. And so what happens? He was saying, "Hey, look, if we're doing the one laptop per child, so that everyone's got access to some sort of digital format, we should include all of this data. And here's a bundle of 20 CDs. Punt them out there, and everyone can access it." And when he went to talk to one of the aid agencies, afterwards, he did his pitch, and they were like, "Well, that's very interesting, Mr. Weir. We'll have to discuss this carefully." And what happened? He afterwards, he ended up having a beer with one of a junior member who said, who basically told him, "You won't get the funding." What? Why not? You won't get the funding because your project is going to be too effective. It means that they will not need us.
They were seeing the changes, yeah.
There's some technology that's too empowering. That's one of the reasons why I've been working.
That is true, but I would also say that reflected, like when I first went to South Africa, I mean, you didn't have any internet. I mean, still it's now, but what we're seeing is also things have shifted. Like back then, it was like getting a manual. Now you can get YouTube videos. So what we're seeing is we are seeing a lot of shift also, like the whole aid world did change from what program can I implement to, and I'm not saying it's not still doing a lot what you say, because it is controlled by the UN, especially the larger scale stuff. But so this is what you're saying is true in the sense of sending it out there. And I think that, but I'm also wondering how we are seeing with technology changing. A lot of it's also like developing that local, supporting the local people from where they're at, because the funding, it's not just about, well, it is partly giving people the access to the manual, but I think there's something else there that's
right. Now, if you look at the on the what's it, Web Curiosity Shop, the plant regulated growing systems, and then if you also look at the earthbox.com, the Web Curiosity, the plant regulated growing systems was one person, one colleague who used to live about 3 streets in that direction, and 3 streets away. He was he'd recreated the Earthbox growing systems. Now, the Earthbox is basically a self-contained growing system that operates by optimizing the conditions for healthy soil bacteria, which gives you better soil, which in turn gives you better crop yields when you're growing things in that soil.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what he was, and the Earthbox themselves, they've never moved beyond being a niche product. They're for sale in the US commercial marketplace. You can find them there, but they've never moved beyond being a niche product. You'll find them in the in-habitat manual catalogs, in the sort of fancy design catalogs, but they never actually crop up else. They never crop up elsewhere. They don't really crop up elsewhere. The reason that they don't crop up elsewhere, their most innovative customers, their primary competition is their most innovative customers doing things for themselves. When you look at the Earthbox systems, growing systems themselves, they cost around 40 quid in the UK. And what happens, they give the advertised crop yields and increases, which means they will pay for themselves in a very short period of time if you're growing stuff for your own use. If you're growing stuff for sale, you're having to think about wholesale prices, but they will pay for themselves on a slightly longer timescale. Now, the problem is that when a friend of mine, Charles, created the plant regulated growing systems, his own homebrew versions, he ended up creating stuff that would pay for it. Right. The Earthbox systems, the Earthbox versions would pay for one harvest if you were growing spinach for your own use. So instead of spending money at the supermarket for spinach, you're just growing it and freezing it and then using it, and taking that same amount of spinach and saying, okay, that would have cost me this much from if I'd gone out and bought it. It would pay for itself within 3 harvests. If you're growing spinach for sale, with the UK wholesale market prices, you're looking at 6 harvests to pay for each growing system. If you're making the systems for yourself, 1 harvest. 1 harvest, and the system is paid for. If the amount of money that you'd spent on the material that you'd spent on spinach over that period of time, you then spent that creating one of these growing systems, and then the amount that and you then grew spinach, you'd end up with 1 harvest worth of growing, and the system is paid for.
Well, that's true.
Every time I'm looking at tools, I'm thinking, okay, that costs this much to build, or this much to buy in, or this much to make. How can I make that tool pay for itself?
You've also got different activities in that equation, right? So, for instance, say I go and I need to get. My job is, here's a bunch of gardeners. I give them stuff, right? And maybe I could give them cheaper if I make it, but the payback is on the process of growing, right? Not the process of making, right? So so you've got, and that may well be, and then you've got and the other thing, obviously, there is an element, and some of this is one of the elements is, and this is where in some ways maybe by the China system, they're very good at basically doing things and making things, but then you can never capture intellectual property because it's always dissipated, right? It's always basically cloned.
The designs that Charles was using are all designs that were out of patent, and these what's his name? Because they're self-contained, you can you can grow stuff anywhere, even if there's contaminated soil. As long as you have a clean water supply, you can continue to grow food. Used sensibly and used globally, you're looking at globally, you could increase the overall amount of growable land on our planet by around 40%.
Well, so okay, so
that's without that's without doing any deforestation. That's without doing any damage to the external environment. This is just using brownfield sites or places that are currently too contaminated to grow stuff. But you can still get, as long as you have water filters and clean water supply, you can grow food. No one on our planet should be going hungry. Yes, the problem is the problem is that, if Earthbox was an effective solution in terms of operating commercially, they'd be being used everywhere, but they're not, because people can make them. They're so simple that people can make them for themselves. That's why it's a niche. That's one of the reasons why it's still a niche product. But at the same time, everyone who's working on this, Charlie was working on one version of the Earth, of the growing system, which is documented in the plant-regulated growing systems. We were working on all kinds of other interesting experiments, but at the same time, there were metric fuck tons of other people out there who were producing their own versions, and everyone
And
was
then
doing
you've
it
also got the
differently.
idea of making it like, for instance, say you've got a rural area, like the question is like, say you've got an area of Africa. So for instance, it might be that most people don't want to have to make it themselves, right? So what you could say is, but you don't necessarily want everything to have to go through the shipping ports all around the world to get there. So the question is, and this is where the scale comes in, right? Is, you know, I want to just be able to do stuff, right? Mostly, right? But it might be that, and I'm in a big city like Toronto, it's very different, right? You live in Sao Paulo, it's all very different when you're right where the main port is, all the big ships come in. But I know, like in where I lived in South Africa, you know, you have one truck that comes up this road, and that's basically the lifeline with all the rice and everything coming in from Asia to feed people. So there is an argument there, but there is still a question of scale, right? Because you see how it always defaults back to global individual. But the question is, where would it be done maybe by a small supplier in this village, and then you have 10 villages that do it? Or where would it be done in one small town which would service 100 villages? That question of where does it make sense? Because at some point, it doesn't make sense. Someone doesn't want to gear up to make bespoke things unless you're into, like, when you make bespoke things, it seems like very obvious. But for a lot of people, they don't want to be making bespoke things, right? They say they don't want to have to, and the cost of buying the gear is prohibitive. So how do you work out the scaling on that? And where do you want to, and the person who is going to make it for, say, an area of 100 kilometers, they need to be able to sustain their family when they do it. So then it might be that, as is happening with IOPA, they may have some of that has got some funding because maybe it can link to a commercial business. But I think that's the bit that, like you say, when I was showing, that's the bit I think that's missing in a lot of the conversations. And even that's what I was saying with this diagram, that diagram that we're talking about, where to make that scale choice locally, to me seems to be.
No,
And that's an open question. We're not going to be able to cover that now, but
okay. No,
yeah.
I understand.
Before we continue here, my friends, we already over the top of the hour. We're already finishing.
Yeah, it's quite
today's RWI touchdown. But I want to point out some very interesting things that we explore here together today. You see, Billy, I'm very related to the open source environment, not only here in Brazil but all over the world. As I said, I was one of the peoples that got around the WikiHows project when it came to Brazil in 2011, 2012. So I'm very aware of the open source projects, open source environments, right? For me, the critical thing about the open source movement is about the individual. This thing about do it yourself, for me, was always a critical thing. Why? Because you're not looking at it as a network phenomenon. You're not looking at it as something that can create new economic peer-to-peer frameworks, to do stuff together. So I remember perfectly when people start to talk about do it with others, DIVO, D-I-W-O, DIVO. And I was around doing that in the favelas here in Brazil, especially here in Rio de Janeiro, talking with people that work their asses off to pay the bills in favelas and say, hey, why don't we do in the weekends some community projects together, but in a very fun way, like let's bring up the kids, let's do some work around whatever the neighborhood needs, something like that. I did that a lot, not only in Rio but all over Brazil, even to the countryside. So I'm really aware of what you're talking about. But once more, for me, the critical thing about the open source movement in a general is that focus on the individual or do it yourself. That that's that that is giving, you're shooting your own foot. It's like the open source movement is shooting its own foot, because in a sense that, oh, wait a minute, just think how people that doesn't have time even to breathe, well, like, to look at their own health, for instance. They look at a manual coming from whatever wiki is out there. Wow, there's a whole thing of instructions of how you can empower yourself to do whatever is open source there. Don't materialize. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of brain power. That's a lot of skill that you have to develop. So for me, it's always about the open source movement wasn't about the individual. It has to be about the collective intelligence. Generates collective intelligences through networks to generate all sorts of communities, to talk to each other. So this is the first thing that I want to highlight. The second thing is that transparency, as you put it, right? And now with Web3 technologies like holochain, like blockchain, you have this ledger, this planetary ledger that you can make it cosmolocal. You can make it visible to anyone, anywhere, any part of the planet, in a very transparent way. The hash is there, all the things around the metadata around what you're doing is there. So you can even have a track record of things that you're doing with others, generate the community, give visibility to the community. So what I'm saying is that I understood that this is the second thing, right? We didn't have the type of cybernetic space on the internet to do that type of thing, but now we have with Web3, right? And looking at the AI landscape, especially with this launch of the DeepSeek coming from China, we can see that we can start to create generative and machine learning AIs in a decentralized, distributed way. See, so you scale down its capability, right, to be attached to this community. So we're starting to have all the ingredients, to make this, to renew the open source movement for this third decade of the 20th century, right? And we have been talking about this in different manners, different contexts, you see, Billy, throughout these 4 years in this RWI touchdown space here. So it was a pleasure to capture your understanding, your point of view, your worldview, your things, because I agree totally with you. Everything is out there. How to construct your house, how to capture water, how to grow your food, everything. But the focus can't be, at least in my understanding, the individual. It has to be something that it can be networked or netweaved between peers, between communities, in a very cosmolocal way, in a very global way. So now we have, the technologies, and last but not least, we have this planetary massive change in terms of climate, right? So that it's naturally making people getting their butts out of the comfort zone. Like, I can see this with my mother, right? My mother is a typical consumer, right? She pays everything, she buys everything, she has, the income to do it. But if she goes to a place that doesn't have it, what she wants, she suffers a lot. She doesn't know what to do, right? So I said to her, Mom, when you travel to a place where you don't have all the amenities, all the products that you just have to buy it first to make it there. Because it was, but she's almost, 84 years old, 83. So in her case, this is the way, right? For her not to suffer, but it doesn't need to be that way for everybody, right? So, and I'm feeling, and I travel a lot, BD, throughout Brazil, and I'm feeling that people are very not really accommodated in their comfort zones anymore, right? Because they're seeing that fiat money is becoming more and more scarce. They're seeing that credit is becoming more and more scarce. They're seeing that already a simplification of products that are not in the supermarket anymore because you have to import them. You have to have more money. So people are starting to feel in their butts that things are shaking like tectonic plate movements, right? And I can see that people are hungry to find new ways to be, to exist in this planet. And that's why we're doing this touchdown here, and to talk about these things, and not only to talk, but to experience, to link to things that are happening. So for me, just to end up, and we're going to do a roundup of checkouts with you guys. For me, is about a protocol. So that's why in the last 2 or 3 years, something that originated here with our explorations and conversations in RWI touchdowns, I co-initiated with others a cyber cultural protocol to create a new layer of internet called Web3 regime, Web3 regime, right? Where there we're going to have all the blueprints, all the blueprints that people can gather together and do things together to make it happen in its own reality, its own city, its own neighborhood, or in the countryside or in favelas, doesn't matter. So this is the work that I've been doing for going to the 3rd year, right? So what I'm saying is that for me is a cultural thing, in a sense that once people are bothered, because of climate change, because of the economic crisis, because of the lack of everything in their daily lives, they look at something like this protocol, regenerative resources, and say, hey, this is something that I can spend some time of my week trying to understand, these Web3 regime blueprints, for instance, related to housing, related to food, related to everything that you can imagine, right? Everything that we're talking about here, right? And people come, they come, and they are opening their houses. We are doing gatherings in the countryside, in favelas, with people. So what I'm saying is that I'm not saying this is the solution, right? I'm just saying that if you're aware of the complexity of the times that we live in, you know that something you can't press people to change drastically or radically their lives, right? You just have to make an open invitation for them to explore new ways to be, new ways to generate health and wealth, and they come in a very hybridistic way, like you're not telling them, hey, you have to change totally the way that you live. No, come on, chime in, connect, sync with us. Let's explore this. And this is happening now with more than 20 projects here in Brazil, almost 150 people that we're doing this all over. So I'm just saying this, guys, just to understand that we're not here only in a philosophical way talking about these things. It's once more, it was nice and very nice, Billy, to let's say to host you, and to hear you up and to see your understanding of things was fantastic. I'm very grateful that we were able to. I forgot to put the AI companion on the Zoom to to make a synthesis for us, but that's okay. But record it, and that's it for me. So very thankful, Billy, for your time, for your knowledge, for your openness, and for your generosity too. So
Oh, hey, I'm always up for gossiping about things, man.
That's my appreciation and my checkout. And I pass it to you do your appreciation for today's RWI touchdown and your checkout too.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for putting up with me. I have a slight tendency to dive off on tangential rants, but that's how it goes. No, it was interesting. It was interesting to gossip and to hear what you guys are up to. Be interested in hearing more about the other projects that you're working on, because those are what's it? How many of those projects are related to the primary industry sectors? Sorry, say again?
You're just on mute at the moment.
I think you're on mute at the moment.
There's not a lot of projects like the open source ecology thing. There's not a whole bunch of them there, but there's one project in Riri's environment, that is mapping out all sorts of open source projects throughout Brazil, and with different purposes. And the name of the project is in Portuguese, Eco Indústria Modular. In English, eco-modular industry.
Right. So there's only the one really that's related directly to the primary industry sectors.
Yes.
Okay, that's a mismatch that needs to be worked on, and it's what's it? If you can't buy stuff for, if you're, what's the phrase? It's like the story, again, headspace that I learned 30 years back from chatting with one guy who was running an artist who was running a video projector systems, where he'd worked when I saw him, he was complaining about the people who hired out this video projector, the previous night had basically not looked after it properly. So he was complaining about having to get it fixed and how much it was going to cost him. And he said, "Oh well, dude, how much did it originally cost you?" And he said, "Oh, £1,000 or so. Got it in special offer." I'm like, "Oh, cool." And how many times have you rented it out? I said, and just as he's about to answer, he said, "No, don't answer. Don't reply. Write it down. Work out how many times you rented it out for how much money and how much cash you paid. You made from it." He suddenly realized. I stuck the kettle on while he was doing that. Came back in with mugs of tea and saying, "Okay, what's the thing?" He realized that he'd been renting it out. He'd actually made £1,200. £1,200. So he'd actually made a profit from renting it out. So it's like, great, the tool is now paid for. You don't need to rent it out. You can afford to choose your customers. You can afford to choose who you're working with, and then now you can you don't have to pay to deal with it that way. And that's one of the ways that I ended up. One of the ways that I ended up thinking, where if I'm working on something and I need to make a tool, or I need to use a tool to make this to work on this thing, it's like, okay, how many times do I need to use that tool before it's paid for itself? At which point, every time I use it afterwards, it's free. Now that's the use of that from the point of view of the software industry and the other stuff, where these are all secondary industries. They are supports to the primary industry, which is the physical extraction of minerals, the physical creation of food. The use of existing nanotechnology that we've currently got. Because we as a species have been using nanotechnology for thousands of years. It's called soil. It's called the optimizing and creating healthy soil bacteria, which is how how rocks break down into soil, which is then used by plants to the point where we can eat it. Or we feed it to other animals, and we then eat the other animals, which again is just it's another stage of processing. Unless you've got that aspect of being able to work on optimizing directly producing stuff for the industrial supply chain, it's always going to be an energy sink. It's always going to be a way of removing energy from the system. If you've got stuff where you're creating things in a sustainable manner that you can then sell on the industrial supply chain, hey, it's great. It means that you're not just providing tools for the you're not just providing commodities for sale to the supply chain. You can use them yourself, which means that you're not having to buy from the industrial supply chains because you've got access to the materials yourself. And it's one of those situations where if you've got the choice between using buying from an Amazon company or buying from a local mask block, which would you do? If you're buying from an exploitative manufacturer or buying from a local manufacturer that runs in a sustainable manner, hey, you can vote with your money. Vote with your energy. Translates into every action that you do, every action that you use.
Yeah, I agree totally. But Billy, as I said, we already on the top here. This is your checkout, or you want to say?
Yeah, I'm going to just check out as well quickly, if that's okay. But that was a really nice conversation. I'm kind of curious and mobilizing community capacities to link in with some of this type of thing, because I tend to work with networks in communities, right, and how to build those networks. And then, okay, so those networks, they do hit these points where there's something missing, right? There's something they can't do. There's something that, and of course, that's the change in a city. Often the challenge is space, right? In a rural area, the challenge is access to materials, and it varies, and we were connecting across age and culture. So it's not always the same thing, but it varies, right? In terms of having a building. But there again, often having a building that works in a rural area is hard. So there's space and the space, right? So there's a physical space which is contained and you can do stuff in, and then there's land, I suppose, and all the stuff that's in between, right? So I think that I'm really interested in, like, if we can pick on some like case studies, we can sort of see ways to take people through some of these questions. This is where some values, definitely there's value in there, right? And the Riri's got that modeling on that. Sensorica's got modeling on that. So let's keep this going together and seeing what You know, I'm trying to get my head around like where some of the key where are the key ways that we understand our worldview coming from different places, right? Because I'm really interested in how then to compare someone else who might be coming from another worldview, or not even from a worldview. They might just have a vision of production, right? Or they might have a life space that they're trying to work with. How can we work and understand so we're not all in our own language, you understand? So we can sort of talk across or between the affordances that that gives us, because I think that's a big challenge, right? Because different people are coming from different levels, different spaces, different scales. So this is an opportunity, and some of these methods you mentioned that really help with that. So yeah, so thanks, Vinny. This is cool. Let's keep consolidating on this.
Okay, okay, my friends. Chibi, do you want to say something, man, before we finish here? We finish up here.
Well, not much. I was listening to the conversation, so yeah, not much to interject there, because I was out of the subject from the start. But that's fine. There's no problem.
Okay.
We can.
Okay, guys. So that's it. We're ending up here today's RWI touchdown. I will be uploading our the recording as soon as possible, right? And sharing it in Sensorica's Discord. So yeah, that's it. Thanks a lot, Billy, once more. Hey, Stefan, very good framings that you give us today. And see you folks around. Until next week. Okay? Bye-bye.
Catch you, bye.